We talked about last week the Babylonian system, basically the new one world religion that was going to emerge, and the Antichrist and this new one world religion would help each other or would be together as the Antichrist rose to power. And we saw that during that midpoint of the tribulation, the Antichrist, along with the kings of the earth, they're going to destroy this universal church because it's going to be a hindrance to the Antichrist's eventual one or world dominion. And he's going to see that as an obstacle that he needs to completely destroy. And so he will. And whatever that church is, and I want to make it absolutely clear, as if you didn't get my email this week, because it's very important that you understand that I know.
So you say it's not the Catholics? Is that what
I wanted just to make sure
it is or is not?
that it is not. I don't think that it is. That you draw that line directly to the Roman Catholic Church. What I am saying is that it's going to be a lot of denominations that come together to make this new universal church. Whether it's going to be, you could have any denomination you could point your finger to. It just, like I said, as you look at it, it obviously is going to be centered in Rome, and I don't want to make the assumption that just because it is there, that it is the Roman Catholic Church. So please understand that. So this morning now we're going to discuss the actual Babylonian, the city of Babylon, and that is the Antichrist economic capital. So let's start out in chapter 18 with verse number 1. The chapter begins with the words, after this, or maybe in your text, after these things. He says, after this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. So the first question you have to ask yourself is this: what does it mean when he says after these things? After these things. What things did we talk about last week?
The harlot.
Yeah.
The beast.
The universal church system that's coming up. That's exactly right. So after the universal church is destroyed, then these things that we're talking about this morning begin. So that is the first thing that we see here, to the indication that this is not talking about the spiritual system, the mystical system that the beast has ridden to power. There is much discussion out there between chapter 18 being an actual city and it being a continuation of the spiritual system that is discussed in 17. I am under the impression, as I think several other commentators are, that this is an actual city. The mystical Babylon was destroyed. You remember how it ended in chapter 17, that the kings of the earth, along with the Antichrist, completely devoured that spiritual, the new universal church. Devoured her. So we can't continue from a point that she's completely devoured to now talking about a new type of spiritual system. She's gone. So that should give you your first indication that this is a city. Not only that, but John calls the city, or Babylon, a city at least 8 times in Revelations. He does it in chapter 14 verse 8, chapter 17 verse 18, 18 and 10, and on so on and so forth. So the city described here kind of leads you to believe that this is actually a literal city with the name called Babylon. Now the problem is that there is no city of that name on earth today. Right? You can't go to a map and say, I want to go to Babylon. Nor has there been since the city of ancient Babylon was destroyed. Therefore, we draw the conclusion it has to be an actual city. Now, on the opposite side of that, a lot of people say, or a lot of commentators will say, that yes, you can say that the Old Testament prophecies were fulfilled when Babylon was completely destroyed. They weren't completely destroyed, and it has not been fulfilled exactly as the Old Testament prophecies have said. So, with that being said, it leads us to believe that a new city will be rebuilt right there on the Euphrates River, where sin began at the very beginning of time, right? when all of this began, that was Satan's capital. That's where Satan started. That's exactly where he's going to finish as well. When we talk about the Tower of Babel, you remember all of that happened during that particular time. And it sits in a very strategic location as well, right? We talked about last week's, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, where whatever is there, whatever that is holding back the West, is going to be brought down for that great battle. I don't know if it has to do with the city that's going to be rebuilt. Who knows? I do know this. If it is going to be rebuilt as it was back during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, this city is going to have the opulence, the luxury, everything you could possibly imagine, the hanging gardens. A city unlike any that we've ever seen before in entire history will be rebuilt. It's going to be the center of everything luxurious that you could possibly imagine. I had originally put in here a lot of the characteristics of when Babylon was the greatest city ever. They had walls. They had diverted the Euphrates River, and it had gone around. There were walls 100 feet high, and the walls were so thick on the outside that 6 chariots riding abreast could go along the top of the wall. You had gold gates and just a magnificent, magnificent city. So to think of bringing that back to what it is, we're going to have to start with a new city sometime going forward to realize what it's going to be. When we think about, and I have to keep this in mind, if you're going to start thinking about the rapture, if all of a sudden we see tomorrow that someone in the Middle East, along in that particular part of the world, Baghdad, just a little south of there, if you're going to begin a city that's going to start creating or growing, and it's going to become a city that's going to have the magnificence of the ancient Babylon, we as Christians should start to take note. Now you're saying, well, Jeremy, wait just a second. How can that be that we're going to build a city that big in a short period of time? The preacher said something pretty interesting a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned it, I think, last week as well, that he almost thought that the rapture would occur after the beginning of the tribulation period, after we see the Antichrist come as the president of the new federation. I have always been under the assumption that the rapture is going to take place prior to the beginning of the tribulation period. Now, that could be 50 years prior, it could be 3 years prior, I don't know. But I do know if he's coming as a thief in the night, meaning that you have no idea when this possibly could happen, that one will be standing in the field and another beside him, and one would be raptured and one would be left behind. When you think about that, you cannot draw the conclusion that if you don't know that a city's beginning to be built on the banks of Babylon River, that you won't start to say, it's starting to get time. You see what I'm saying? How could you possibly say that, well, the rapture is going to happen at this date, and knowing that the things that have been revealed to us in Revelation through what John saw, knowing that you would now know that time is about to begin to start to end. So I think the revelation, or the rapture rather, could happen anytime. And whatever goes on from this point forward, it could very well happen at like I said, at any time. Does that make sense? If you disagree with me, I completely understand. The preacher does as well. He's well more versed in this than I am, but I just don't see how you can draw those connections together. So, that being said, if you want to say that what we're talking about in chapter 18 is still the spiritual system, still that one world religion that we talked about last week on chapter 17, and you can make those come together if you wanted to, I will give you more information on that after class. But for me and for most, even I think the preacher would agree with me too, that the topic here is the actual Babylonian city as we go through this. So some sort of city will be rebuilt on the bank of the Euphrates River, and that is a topic of discussion this morning. John gives us 3 reasons. 3 reasons why this city will be destroyed. Uh-oh, Jeff, you can't do that in class.
Well, my Bible it says it's the whore or the harlot. It's same exact opposite.
It does, yeah, I know, and mine did too. When I have a new a Bible at home, it's the same as Tracy's got right there. You didn't bring your Bible?
I mean, to your point earlier about being a thief in the night comment,
Like 2 and 3 are.
we don't know because this is also figurative, and we're trying to put our best guess, and we don't know when the rapture is going to happen, and that adds to the thief in the night comment. We're not supposed to know.
We're not supposed to know.
We
That's
50
exactly
could be posted.
But if you know that you see someone come on as the king of a new federation or the president of a 10-nation federation in Europe, you pretty well can start your clock by that time, right?
Well, I was just sitting here thinking, as you described that city, we're still trying to rebuild Afghanistan.
Yeah.
We're talking years. Like, if the rapture is supposed to happen somewhere near the tribulation, nobody in this room is going to be part of the rapture. Because, I mean, the way the government stuff works, we can't build a wall on board. I mean, it's just, we're talking, how long is it taking to build a skyscraper?
Yeah, let's take something into mind.
I'm just saying,
And Shane brought this up a couple of times. We talked about it individually. That in today's time, you put several governments together, a 10-nation federation. Let's talk about the 10-nation European nation that you're going to have emerge. When they all come together individually, they can make something happen, and you could build a city in a matter of just a little bit of time.
Not to mention everything that's happened the first 3.5 years. You know, this city, like he was saying, 3 years you can do a lot of stuff. There's a lot of money that you're going to have readily available once all those countries are together, and you can probably build something pretty in
I
3
mean,
years'
Afghanistan's
time.
a coalition. I mean, there's a lot of people working in Afghanistan right now. That's not,
There are a lot of people working against it too.
Well, all I
I'm
know.
not trying to derail it. I'm just
No,
saying,
you're absolutely right. I understand exactly, because Shane and I had the same conversation. I'm like, you can't do this in a short period of time. And Shane was like, I bet you could. I bet if you had a whole bunch of governments that were all coming together for the same cause, they could get something done pretty quickly. Wasn't that kind of your point, Shane? Roughly. I'm just paraphrasing what he said. That's what I got out of our hour-long conversation, those 3 sentences. No, I'm playing. Okay, so 3 reasons that John says that Babylon will be destroyed. The first one is the magnitude of her sins. The second is the measure of her sins. And thirdly, the madness of her sins. And so let's talk just a little bit about all 3 of those as we go forward. The first reason Babylon is overthrown, he said, is because, like I just said, the magnitude of her sins. The city will be wholly given over to 2 things: demonism and depravity. In fact, it is said to be the home of demons. John says, as he said here, and he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a hold for every unclean spirit, a hold for every unclean bird, a hold for every unclean and detestable beast. So you see that demon worship here will have its home in Babylon there again, as it did in the past. In Daniel's day, when Babylon was the home of magicians, soothsayers, astrologers, who were all the official counselors of the king, remember that Daniel was called in because no one else could answer Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He had all of these people, and we were going to have them all killed because no one could answer his dream. Right? It was the home of soothsayers, demons, all of that. Magicians, what were you going to say, Jeff? Oh, I thought you said So you have all of those that are there dwelling in this particular place. And with today's reviving of cults and Satanism, spiritism, occultism, witchcraft, astrology, you go on and on and on and on and on, you're going to have that gravitate towards this new city of Babylon. All of these new free thinkers, all of these new occults that are coming up, they will gravitate towards this new city that will be built. So the first thing we have here, we see that demonism will be there under that first section that you have in your notes. Second of all, notice that he said that the city will not only be destroyed for demonism, but will also be the headquarters of depravity. Now, what is depravity?
Being deprived of something.
Being deprived of something. I looked it up this morning, moral corruption or wickedness. So when I say it's the headquarters of depravity, that's what he's saying here. Look what John says. He says, for all nations have drunk of the wine of wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. She will be toasted around the globe as an enlightened, a liberated, a city that is gone away with prudish religious quacks, I guess you could say. Her constitution will be free to reign in all forms of immorality. You see, the rulers of the earth will be absolutely captivated, I think would be a good word, by the prospect of getting rich through her trade. The beast is going to introduce some sort of novel or ingenious economic system, and Babylon's going to be sought out by the rulers of the entire world to become rich.
Which is crazy because all these people have died and all this stuff that's happened in the past. I wouldn't care about money right now.
Yeah, well, remember that you're not going to be able to buy and sell or trade without being a part of this. So when you talk about your economic system being based here in the New Babylon, then that's where all the money, the Bank of Babylon or the Bank of whatever, is going to be focused right there in Babylon. So the place to get rich is going to be not New York City, but right here in Babylon.
And the whole idea of preparing yourself for it, you're not going to be able to because you can't live off the land because
it's been destroyed
in
in some one way or fashion.
Yeah.
So, secondly, Babylon's going to be overthrown because of the measure of her sin. Notice what John talks about, the enticement of her sins. Look how enticing it is for everyone. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sin, lest you share in her plagues." So there are a few believers here that we see that are still left on earth that have nothing to do with the city. Babylon's their trade, the traffic, it's accursed by God, and God's people must resist all those enticing offers that are going to be made by this Vanity Fair. What's the biggest thing now that you see people drive after? What is their goal in life, is to get what? Get more what?
Money.
Power, social media likes.
I was gonna say get rich quick kind of thing. And yeah, like Jeff was saying with social media stuff is
Yeah, but we work to accrue more what? Wealth,
Better yourself. You know, better yourself.
You're right.
better yourself,
Just stuff.
right?
On stuff.
We get to a point that you just have more stuff. When we talk about this, look at Babylon, and these people are going to be the center of everyone who has everything. Okay, so you're going to have her, and people are going to be drawn by this because we want more, we see more, we're like, wow, I can have that if I live there. God's going to say, and call them out and give them a warning and say, come out of them now. That Vanity Fair that you see that's going to be happening there in Babylon is going to draw so many people there because of the facts of there being wealth. Now
Well,
notice
I think
that
another
John,
thing too is if you actually have a family, you're going to want to go to this place because this is a place where you can actually survive.
because things have happened so
Yeah.
much around the world. That's
This is where
exactly
you're
right.
gonna, this is going to be the only
People are
safe
going to
place.
gravitate.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And when you talk about this being one of the cities where it has everything, probably the food and the clothes, that's where you're going to
Probably
gravitate
got
towards.
3 or 4 Sam's Clubs in there, you know.
At least
Maybe
3 or
Costco.
4 cents. A Costco, maybe, yeah. Notice that he also describes the enormity of Babylon's sins. The angel explains, "For her sins have reached heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities." The enormity of her sins. This comes at a time when the sins of that nation or city have reached heaven, and the cry aloud for God to act. It seems like God stays silent and indifferent on so many times throughout history that he's turning a deaf and blind eye towards what's happening, doesn't it? But suddenly we see that God's going to act. Just like in the days of Noah, just like in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the city of Nineveh.
Retaliation.
It comes at times when God is absolutely ready to make it happen. Babylon is going to be a city that has been built up. The sins have gotten so bad in that particular place that God will no longer turn his back. And in 1 hour, the city will be completely destroyed. Now that's amazing to think in 1 hour something could go from such grandeur to absolutely nothing. And he mentions it multiple times in the next few verses. God's going to bring it down to absolutely nothing. Finally, Babylon is overthrown because of the madness of her sins. In other words, her crowning sins are two things. One, pride. That's not hard to figure out, is it? And two, presumption. Notice what was said to John. And as she glorified herself, and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, in mourning I shall never see. For this reason her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for might is the Lord God who has judged her. Oh, Babylon's going to enjoy the good life for quite some time. But even the opulent standard and living that is ours, and which, by the way, is the envy of the entire world, it's going to be just shadowed. When you think about the United States and the way it's viewed around the entire world, we are wealthy individuals. That's going to be nothing compared to the way Babylon is viewed. Absolutely going to just seem like it doesn't even exist as far as the comparison. Babylon's going to be the Laodicea of cities of the world. And what do I mean by that? Do you remember what was said about the church in Laodicea? What was their prominent sin that God brought about them? It was they're rich and increased in goods and feeling her need of nothing. They didn't need anything extra. They had all that they needed, right? So with the crown upon her head and the consort by her side, and with the swelling confidence in her heart, the queen of the cities will mock at the thought of judgment. More likely it won't even entertain the thought of someone sitting her down. Because you notice what it says here, that I shall never see mourning. She's confident, right? She's presuming that she's over everything else. But then comes, and notice again, he says, in a single day, the vengeance of God. Death and mourning, famine, it'll be burned up with fire. Babylon will be brought to dust. Two reactions. One, those that are grieved by it. And two, those that are gladdened by it. Completely opposite from those. Who would you think, without me going any further in this presentation, who are those who are grieved by what's happening?
The ones that are standing with them and prospering with them and everything. But now they're gone. With them goes the money as well.
With them goes the money. Anybody who has had any kind of richness or reward from being associated with the new Babylonian capital, they're going to be grieved by it. Let's stop right there. We'll pick up next week. I don't want to get too far because we still got about 5 slides in this lesson. And we'll pick up next week because it kind of goes into chapter 16 through verse 6 as well. So we'll stop right there and pick up. So bring your sheets if you remember next week, and we'll talk about that. Questions, comments?
How do you think that they're gonna move California that far?
Exactly.
All the way over there?
I think California is not even going to be close on the radar when we get to where.
You know, in all seriousness though, I don't know, I've not read this exactly, but does it say that it has to be on the river? Because like, you've got Dubai that's real close by, that's real fancy, and that's what the world sees.
You do, but well, here's the thing. When you talk about Babylon being rebuilt, and you look at where it is in relation to Baghdad, it's just a little south of Baghdad here. And you talk about this, I really firmly believe, and I could be wrong, that where the whole demon Satan's beginning started, right here at the beginning really of where humanity started, this is where he's going to end as well. Now, could it be Baghdad? Could it be somewhere else? It is.
Well, I'm just saying, like, y'all are saying that it couldn't be built in that amount of time, and there's a city that's that close, that's pretty much there. I mean, everybody's, whenever you think of Dubai, that's what you think of is how beautiful it is and how nice it is and how rich it is.
Well, you're also talking though about the ten nation
Nation
federation. If they ever stop fighting each other and blowing all their crap up in that area, they can put some stuff together in a hurry. But until that happens, you know, so I think that would be a big tip off that something's coming is whenever they stop blowing their own stuff up.
I think part of sometimes Christian apathy comes from the fact that we think this is still so far off.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is a huge misleading factor because you're thinking, oh wow, some people put together all of this has to happen before the rapture takes place. That's the reason I'm almost a firm believer that if the rapture happens tomorrow, things begin to happen at a fairly rapid pace. Whether this city is rebuilt in a matter of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, I don't know. But it just seems to me like we have to be raptured out before all of this starts. Otherwise, we can kind of sort of start a clock and be like, I know what needs to happen next. Because if Bible prophecy is going to be absolutely true, then we have to say that, oh, I need to watch because I know. Because John told us in Revelation.
Building
Daniel,
the city, we're looking at it from our aspect. A lot of people can do a lot of things real quick.
Going along with
I
what
just
Chris-
looked at, I mean, because I gotta say this, Becky's like, oh, don't make a point. Well, China just built a 600,000 square foot,
Yeah.
2-story hospital in 10 days and it's functioning.
Can't even get a house.
10
days.
600,000 square foot, 2-story hospital, all functioning in 10 days.
Yep.
Of course, it was built in China though.
Exactly, but see, we're looking at
Quality.
we're looking at the way we would do things, and that wouldn't be. You can build it.
Here's
People, a
another
lot of
thing
people
is-
can do a lot of things.
Let's say that the rapture does happen. What is, if you look at Muslims in general, their biggest thing is trying to kill non-Muslims or Christians and stuff like that. If they don't have to worry about killing Christians anymore because all the Christians are gone because of the rapture, that could bring them together.
Yeah, they could
Now,
put their.
remember what I said about how the Antichrist will use the Muslim world in the fight against Russia. Okay, now he's going to pit one against the other. So there is I think the Antichrist has a plan for the Muslim world, but
Well, I think they're so tied to with East or not Esau. I'm losing my mind here. Israel and all that. I think they're so tied to the Bible that they were the bad side of this. That there's no way that they won't be used.
yeah. Well, they will definitely be a part. How they're a part, I'm not certain, but I do know that they will be a part.
First thing you gotta do is have the Shiites and Sunni agree on anything,
Right.
and that's the biggest obstacle for them coming together.
When you talk about 200 million people being killed during this one battle with Russia, there's a lot of people over there in a small part of the world. A lot of people, a lot of Muslims. Okay. Let's close then on a quick word of prayer.